Greetings. On your screen you see Zakir Naik, a popular Muslim apologist from India who is also a famous polemicist against the Christian faith. You can find numerous videos of Naik on YouTube listing his alleged, which have him listing alleged errors and contradictions in the Bible. The clip I'm about to show is from his debate with William Campbell from about 11 years ago. I'm actually planning on making a much larger video on the subject of how Naik approaches the Bible and the Qur'an in light of science, but in the meantime I wanted to make this short video to get across the basic themes which I'll cover in that forthcoming video, al-MaseeHee. With all due respect to Naik, I feel that there's an overt duplicity in how he treats the Bible and the Qur'an. He employs a double standard when dealing with the Qur'an, where he'll consult the Arabic text and try to interpret it in light of science. But when it comes to the Bible, that approach is scrapped, and instead he makes no recourse to the Hebrew or Greek text and works strictly from translations. Furthermore, he deliberately interprets the verses in opposition to modern science. So what we have a situation is that we don't really get the Bible versus the Quran, we get Naik's interpretation of the Bible versus Naik's interpretation of the Qur'an. So in this video, and Christ willing, in the video I hope to make in the future, I want to show that there's an alternative mode of exegesis, or alternative modes of exegesis, which can be taken to the Bible. Just as many modern Muslims employ a scientific hermeneutic approach to the Quran, in which they plumb the depths of the three-dimensional nature of the Arabic text for ways to harmonize the text with science, so too Christians can employ a scientific hermeneutic approach to their own text, the Bible, and this can be especially fruitful when they're exploring the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. In this video, I'll be looking at two easy examples from the litany of charges Naik has raised against the Bible. In each instance, I'll allow Naik to present his case first for why the relevant passage is an error, and then I'll delve into the Hebrew text from which the verse was translated, and I'll attempt to show how a rather different interpretation is possible, one which is actually harmonious with science. So the first clip will have Naik giving his thoughts on why Proverbs 6:7 is an error. Okay, here we go.
It's mentioned in the Proverbs chapter number 6 verse number 7 that ant has got no ruler, no seer, no chief. Today we know that ants are sophisticated insect. They have a very good system of labor in which they have chief, they have foreman, they have workers, they even have queen, they even have a ruler. Therefore Bible is unscientific.
Okay, now that we've seen Naik's interpretation, let's turn to the Hebrew text of that verse. On your screen you see the Hebrew text for both the 6th and 7th verses of Proverbs chapter 6 together. This is Proverbs 6:6 and 6:7 together. I'd like to show an alternative view to the one that Naik took. Right at the beginning, the first thing I want to point out is that the word for ant is namla. Namla. Now this word is actually feminine. And this is actually significant because the key to understanding the passage is going to be related to the genders. So the Hebrew word for ant in this verse is namla, which is feminine. Now, when you read the verse in context, you see that it's referring to an ant which gathers food, and thus this is a worker ant. The Bible uses a feminine word to describe that worker ant. And this fact about genders employed in the verse gets more interesting. For example, note that the phrase derecheha literally means her ways. Here, I have it highlighted here, and when the text refers to the ways of the ants, it's literally her ways, derecheha. The possessive suffix at the end of the word is literally feminine. Were it masculine, it would have been derechayo, or I suppose as per modern Israeli pronunciation, derechayev, whatever the case, with the wa as the possessive suffix, not a hey. And there's yet still more support along these lines. When the text states that the ant does not have a ruler or an overseer, etc., the relevant phrase is ein la, which literally means she does not have a ruler, chief, etc. The statement is in the feminine. If it were in the masculine, it would have been ein lo. Understand? So ein la, which is what appears in this verse, is feminine. Masculine, he doesn't have, would have been ein lo. So the text literally says she does not have a chief or an overseer or a ruler. So now let's think about this. The passage uses a feminine word for the worker ant, uses a feminine possessive suffix when referring to her ways, and uses a feminine construction referring to what she does not have. This seems to be reasonable ground on which to think that the text intended to state that the worker ants are female, which is actually true. And it is worth And it's with this point that we can now get to the part which states that the female worker ant has no ruler, overseer, or chief, or whatever. The Hebrew text actually employs three different words, all meaning things along the lines of the words which I just used: ruler, overseer, supervisor, chief, etc. They all have roughly that meaning. But let's note the gender of those three words. The first word is qatzin, which is masculine. The second word is shoter, which is also masculine. The third word is moshel, which yet again is masculine. So to recap, the passage in Proverbs is stating that the female worker ant has no male ruler, no male supervisor, no male chief. She, the female worker ant, does not have these male superiors. Now, far from being a scientific error, as Naik claimed, this is actually a scientific fact. In ant colonies, there is a stratification, with different ants having different levels of authority over one another, and they even have rulers. But those positions are all held by females. Worker ants are female, soldier ants are female, and the leader of the colony herself, the queen, is female. Male ants, i.e. the drones, don't contribute to anything except in the breeding process. They only contribute to the breeding process, and they don't hold any positions of power within the colony. So it seems that after a closer inspection of the text of this passage, it's not the error that Naik wrongly interpreted it to be. On the contrary, it's actually stating something fascinating, a scientific fact that's quite amazing if you ask me. And now, having established that, I'd like to turn to the second example. In this next clip, Zakir Naik is going to attempt to explain why Leviticus 11:20 contains a scientific error. Have a look.
Of Leviticus chapter number 11 verse number 20, among the abomination things, fowls with 4 feet. They are an abomination. And some scholars say that fowl is the wrong translation of the Hebrew word uf. In King James, it should be insect or winged creature. And in New International Version, it says winged creature. But it says all insects which are 4-footed are an abomination. They are detestable for you. I want to ask Dr. William Campbell, which insects have got 4 feet? Even a student who has passed elementary school knows that insects have got 6 feet. There is no bird in the world, there is no fowl in the world, there is no insect in the world which have got 4 feet.
Okay, having seen that, here's the Hebrew text of Leviticus 11:20 from which the verse was translated. I'd first like to note that the Hebrew word of, which I highlighted here, this is a noun form related to a verb meaning to fly. So when the verse uses this word of, it's referring to creatures which can fly. They don't have to be fowls, i.e. birds or chickens or whatever, and they don't have to be insects. They're just creatures that fly. And these creatures which fly can also walk on all fours. Now Naik notes that certain English translations interpret the verse as referring to insects. That's based on an interpretation of the previous word, sheretz, which I highlighted here. While indeed the word can refer to insects, it does not have to be restricted to insects. It's a noun form related to a verb which means to creep or crawl or swarm. Interestingly, the verb form can be found in the same chapter in verse 29. So let's turn to Leviticus 11:29. The root appears twice in this verse when it reads basheretz hashoretz. Some translations render that, quote, creeping things which creep, end quote, and other translations render it things which crawl. Whatever the case, sheretz is the same word which appears in verse 20, and shoretz is an active participle of the verb form. The point is that the relevant root, whether it's in its noun form or verbal form, refers simply to things which creep or crawl. So verse 29 goes on to include rodents and reptiles under this heading. So sheretz should be thought of as small crawling creatures. They don't have to be insects or birds. They could be rodents, they could be lizards, reptiles, turtles, etc. Therefore, when getting back to Leviticus 11:20, that verse should be understood as referring to small creatures which crawl, have an ability to fly, and walk on all fours. Contrary to Naik's claim that no such creature exists, I would note that verse 19 mentions specifically bats before making this segue into this description that we have in verse 20. The bat is precisely an example of a creature which creeps or crawls, flies, and can walk on all fours. So I'll close this video with a clip of bats walking on all fours, but before I do, let me say that I hope that viewers walk away from this brief discussion realizing that just as Muslims believe that the Arabic text of the Qur'an can go deeper than any translation, so too the Hebrew text of the Old Testament can go deeper than any translation as well. Furthermore, I hope people see that many of these charges and allegations of quote-unquote errors tell us more about how the critic is interpreting the text, or translations of the text, than it does about the text itself. As I said at the outset, I plan on making more videos along these lines in the near future, al-MaseeHee. Until then, enjoy this footage of bats walking on all fours.